It's not just say a sentence to leave people hanging day, but it's the day I tell you what the best how to draw manga book is, and a good how to draw a manga book goes over the techniques of not just drawing manga, but making art. A lot of the principles of art and design are present in manga, but some books just skip over that and go straight to the style part. Yes, there's books that will supplement it, like how to ink manga or books on perspective, storytelling, layout, and character design, and you can argue it's hard to put all of that in one book, but I think even a tiny piece of any of that makes a more well-rounded how to draw a manga book. It's like the pizza of learning. Oh crap, I forgot I'm allergic to learning. A bad book is like bad pizza. It only focuses on the surface and has a poor tasting sauce of instruction. The analogy is getting away from me, but the point is, some shit sucks! The surface brings us to the other aspects of manga, like the ideas and story. But some books don't focus on the craft itself. They sometimes skip over the unique language that manga has in comparison to other types of comics. By language, I'm talking about the visual and story tropes found in manga.
What is a good/bad example of these books? That is a tough question because I think anything that gets someone to draw has done more good than harm, but I do think that when you get these books from people who clearly don't have an understanding or appreciation for the style, that you really aren't obtaining any knowledge of the style or why the style looks the way that it does. When I was a kid and would receive what would be considered a bad example of a how to draw book, even as a kid I could tell that something about the book was off. I could immediately look at the art in that book and know that the artist that made it either didn't watch or read anime or manga or was just asked by a publisher to make the book and so they just did. And then I think you can tell in the artwork that there is something like lackluster or disingenuine about it. But if anybody enjoyed that kind of book or it did help them in some way, then I can't say that it was a bad thing, I guess.
The only way I could ever see like a bad example is if it's trying to give misleading information and saying like, this is the certain way you have to do it, like there's no other way, things like that. A good example would be also what I said earlier, how it's just wanting to kind of like uplift artists and, try to say like, everyone has struggles, no one's perfect. I am definitely not perfect. And in fact, I hate my style at times, but I have to realize that it's very unique and there is almost no one, if no one, that has the same exact style.
We looked at Melty-chan, but what about more recent books? I flipped through Andrew Harn's How to Draw Manga, Mastering Manga. It came out in 2015 and has a lot going for it for being a Western offering. It goes into a lot more detail on how to build a head or body, and even has an exercise to draw from real-life photos, which I don't see in these books often. Another thing is the warm-up section at the beginning. Warming up is also very important for artists before they draw, just like you have to warm up before exercise. It goes into the digital technique pile. I found this on Kindle. What else you got, Kindle-kun? Forbidden pile. Some honorable mentions of great books goes to the Style School books. It has some tutorials, but mostly it's about illustration. Still, I highly recommend this for its traditional tutorials and its collection of great illustrations by artists that they feature, as well as people who sent art to them from every sort of level of skill. Same goes for the Japanese Comikers books. This is one of my favorite art books in general. Every time I go back to it, I just get wowed all over again. And lastly, on the honorable mentions, Manga Design, book designs for Japanese comic books. It collects tons of interesting cover design for manga, connected designs, special printings, compositions, motifs. It's just so inspiring. It's my favorite of my recent buys, and I kinda wanna do a whole video on just book cover designs I love, because I really do like book covers. I've done book covers. It's great. You know what? Fuck it. I'm putting it in reference. There's one how to draw a manga book that stands above everything I've read. And the thing is, it's not a how to draw book. The best book on creating manga is Hirohiko Araki's Manga in Theory and Practice, The Craft of Creating Manga is one of the best books on the topic I've ever read. If you don't know who Hirohiko Araki is, he's the guy behind When you start the path of manga, you start walking on what he calls the royal road. Here's my copy. You see it's well loved, and I put tabs on things that really stood out to me most so I could easily find them again. This book has things like the foundation to making the first panel of your manga. Not just page, but panel. His guide to writing and making great characters is up there with books I've read about storytelling. He talks about dialogue, the best structure for storytelling in shonen, how to implement all of the theory, and the Kisho Tenketsu. For anyone who wants to understand manga, especially shonen manga, or just JoJo's on a deeper level, this is required reading. Even if you just want to create a webcomic or a comic, there's a lot to learn here. I started breaking down my favorite manga a lot more just to take from them. You know what? This book is getting its own category. King. Yeah, king. So, what is the best way to learn how to draw manga? Other than just reading how to draw manga books, learn from your favorite artists. If you're able to, read interviews from them. Think about how their art just works. Break it down. Watch videos. Practice. Read manga. Practice. Study storytelling. Practice. Read anatomy books and use references for fashion, hair, poses, and more. Practice.
The best answer I can possibly give is just by reading manga. I know it sounds kind of silly, but you'd be surprised I myself learned that way. And to this day, I still use some of the same techniques that I learned and picked up from reading some of my favorite manga back in middle school, like Fruits Basket, Skip Beat. I still use some of those techniques to this day, and that's the best advice that I can possibly give. It kind of goes the same with anime. By watching anime, I picked up on certain things. So everyone learns differently though. Don't be too hard on yourself. And if you learn by how to draw manga books, that's great. You can also do YouTube tutorials. In fact, I do some of those as well. And by reading manga. So there's so many different ways, but whatever fits you best, just kind of explore.
I think that there are so many ways to go about learning different styles. Create an inspiration folder on your computer of manga artists' work that really influence you, or look at and study how they make their line art or how they color their work. And there are so many great artists on social media that even record their process nowadays. I still think that no matter the style, it's still important to practice drawing from life and do studies of people in general, because it's easier to bend anatomy stylistically when you have a good understanding of it. I personally don't read how to draw books like I used to anymore. Instead, I usually buy zines or printed sketchbooks of artists I enjoy and break down how they create their style visually. I think that I get more knowledge from watching live streams of artists working or watching videos about artists talking about their process and things like that. But if you are serious about growth, I would suggest finding forums or Discord servers actually that are dedicated to artistic growth, somewhere where you can get advice or critique of your work. And I know that it can be really scary to purposely send your art out there to get picked apart, but after doing it a few times, it becomes easier and easier, and you start to think more about how to look at your art critically as well. In college, you have art critiques almost weekly. It helps so much, and I learn more from my peers than anyone else. You'll also find the best resources from other artists, such as drawing videos and things like that. My friends and I are always sending links to each other when we find a good breakdown of anatomy or perspective and things like that. Be as open as you can about learning, and don't keep your art in a bubble. You can improve so much more by working on your weaknesses as well as your strengths.
The other thing is that the best way is to never give up. Yeah, most of us watching this don't live in Japan, and we can't just submit our stuff to manga publishers hoping to be in their next contest. But you do it because that's the style of story you want to do. Or even if you don't, you can take what you've learned and use those skills or structures in your indie, superhero, or whatever comic you're making. I love manga. Even though I don't exclusively try to draw that way anymore, what I've learned, what I've read, what I've been inspired by will always be with me, forever. I asked on Twitter, what was your first how to draw manga book? I'm pretty sure it was one of the Christopher Hart books. Not sure which one. This one specifically. I learned from my best friend's copy of Katie Coop's How to Draw Manga in 7th grade, but the first one I owned myself was her second book, How to Draw More Manga. I loved those books so much. Do you have a history with these books too? I want to talk, so comment below. I know I didn't get to talk about every single book, but I think I'm going to do another one of these type of videos in the future about art books, so let me know what I missed, or let me know what you want me to look at. One thing I took away from doing these videos is that I want to collect all of the Graphic Shaw books because it's a piece of fandom history and its reference. Thanks to S Comic Maker and Impractical Artist for talking to me about this topic. And if you want my recommendations for books, I put them in the description. Hey Rubies, welcome to my art room, and I think this Venn diagram describes me now that I talked about manga. Damn it!